There once was a dude with a fro. Watch him work out and get low. Okay. I have nothing to say. What's going on? I honestly don't know. Hey guys, James here again, and today I want to talk about WarioWare Get It Together, a minigame compilation game developed by Nintendo and Intelligent Systems. It follows in the footsteps of previous WarioWare games, bringing you wacky and quick-paced microgames, but the gimmick this time around is that you play the different games using a variety of different characters, each with their own different mechanics, and a larger focus on co-op and multiplayer. For those who haven't played a WarioWare game, the easiest way to explain it would be it's like if you took minigame collection games like Mario Party, removed the board game, condensed the minigames to under 5 seconds each, and made the focus trying to beat as many of the games as you can before you run out of lives. The games tend to be really simple, but the ever-quickening pace and increasing difficulty will sometimes have you stressing. So without further ado, let's dive into this review. So right off the bat, you get a cutscene that sets up the entire game. The Wario gang is developing a video game, and as they all gather to see the final product, the game bugs out and sucks everyone into the game. The first mode that you need to unlock is a story mode, and here you need to play through various stages where you engage in a number of micro games and eventually reach and beat the boss level for each stage. If you've played previous WarioWare games, you're probably aware that all the games after the original had some sort of gimmick to them. So for example, in WarioWare Twisted, you had to literally twist the Game Boy around using a gyroscope built into the cartridge. In WarioWare Touched, you had to use the DS's touchscreen. And in Smooth Moves, you had to use the Wiimote's point and motion capabilities to play different style of games. This time around, the gimmick is that you and maybe a friend control actual characters and use their unique abilities to interact with the different microgames. While I think the idea is cool, I do think compared to some previous entries, it can feel a bit underwhelming. But it's also understandable that since, while gyro, touch, and motion are all available to the Switch, they've all been done before, so I at least appreciate them going at the game with a fresh perspective. Each character is different, so the ways to tackle each of the microgames can be different depending on what character you get. So for example, Wario can float around and has a bash attack which goes horizontally. Young Cricket, the second character you unlock, is a traditional platforming character, as he's more ground-based, but he has a high jump ability. There are a variety of different characters, including quite a few new additions to the WarioWare roster, and each character is different, although while some feel very unique, others might feel like slight tweaks to other characters you've already unlocked. One issue I had with the different characters though is the fact that I think it's pretty clear that some characters are a lot better than others, but that could also be minigame dependent. This made me feel like, unless you're really trying to challenge yourself, you'll probably find yourself wondering, why the heck would I ever use this guy again? In fact, even though the game is on the casual side, I wouldn't be surprised if we see character tier lists pop up down the line. Before every stage, you have to select a certain number of your unlocked characters to play the level with. While playing through the story initially, you'll obviously be more restricted since you haven't unlocked everyone yet, but later on you can revisit stages and use newer characters to play through older levels. You then play through a series of microgames, usually all following a certain theme based on the stage, and the game will randomly select which character you need to use to beat each game. For those unfamiliar with what these games might be like, it's a bit hard to explain, it might be easier to just show you.
Tweeze. Yeah. Yay.
The objectives tend to be pretty simple, but the art style and context of the games can be pretty absurd and wacky, and honestly, I think my brother summed it up perfectly when he said, "The Japanese can be so weird." While beating the games can obviously be fun, I think a lot of the enjoyment also comes from the extremely weird art style and a wacky sense of humor. The game will select a microgame from a certain pool of games, and the announcer will shout an objective for you to try and complete correctly and within the time limit. Some games are extremely simple, but I do think that not every game will be very intuitive, and at least for your first 1 or 2 times playing certain games, you might be left wondering, what the heck was I supposed to do there? This issue can be compounded by the fact that the different characters have different mechanics, so it might not always be clear how certain characters can beat certain games. Even so, I do have to commend the developers for making every character able to play every game, and I do think that this can lend to some more replayability as you might need to think quickly and outside the box in order to figure out how certain characters should tackle certain games. On the other hand though, I can't help but feel like maybe the game might have been better off having certain games being tailored to certain characters, almost like how in Smooth Moves you had the different Wiimote poses to start certain games. You could still have sets of games which are applicable to certain subsets of characters. For example, some games are maybe only meant for flying characters, while some might be applicable to all characters. I think that might have allowed for a greater variety of games and character designs, and this is made even more apparent in one of the later boss fights, which I won't really spoil here. I also can't help but feel like because of the character gimmick, the variety of minigames does feel a little bit more restricted, and personally, I would have liked to have seen them use some more of the Switch's capabilities, both in-game and in character design. Regardless, there are a ton of games here, around 200 total, which is more or less consistent with other WarioWare games, and I thought the highlight was definitely the 9-volt stage where you play through different Nintendo-based minigames. For me personally though, as someone who's played since Twisted, I feel like playing the game solo didn't feel quite as fun as previous games, and to be honest, I'm not really sure why. One thing I will note is that I found the boss stages not nearly as interesting as bosses in previous games, and for me personally, I felt like the story mode was a bit underwhelming and maybe just too easy. I sort of felt like the game just lacked some of the intensity of previous entries. This is especially the case because they allow you to continue stages by spending Wario coins, which you can obtain by beating stages and playing the game. I also couldn't help but feel like while the game is playable as one player, it's definitely better with co-op, as the name of the game sort of implies. Co-op makes the game especially fun as the two of you may butt heads or freak out as you try to figure out how to beat the different micro games. Even so, at times I did feel like some of the games left one of the two players with not much to do. I think the highlight of the game has to be the variety pack that you unlock later on. This mode allows you to select from a variety of alternate modes in many of the games that you play with up to 4 players. There are some which are more long-form games like Bounce It, which is a game where up to 4 players try to keep a ball up in the air as long as possible. There are also some competitive modes where players compete in different micro games. My favorite of those would have to be Balloon Bang, which basically acts like a game of hot potato where one player tries to beat the micro game given to them before the other players can inflate and pop a balloon. Beat it in time and you send another player into the danger zone. Another interesting game I wanted to call out here is Frenemy Frenzy, which basically is a fighting game where you randomly cycle through the different characters, and this can be some silly fun. They also have the Wario Cup, which is basically the game's weekly challenge mode. This mode will assign you a certain character and make you try to beat as many games as you can in order to win different prizes, and this can actually be quite a challenge. You can also post your high scores online to compare yourself against other gamers. Outside of the main game, they have some interesting side activities you can engage in. For example, in the Emporium, you're able to spend Wario coins in order to obtain prezzies, which you can give to different characters. You then level up characters in order to unlock different color schemes and skins, as well as concept art, which can be really cool. This of course brings me to some of the technical aspects of the game, which I think are some of the best parts of the game. As you've probably seen and as I've mentioned before, the art style is just so weird and absurd. It mixes a bunch of different styles with some photorealistic parts, some nice video game art, as well as some really crude but oddly endearing drawings. It's all over the place like you might expect with a WarioWare game, but it's just so wacky and really funny. I think another highlight has to be the music, which in my opinion was really enjoyable. There are a bunch of different themes for the different stages, and while they might not necessarily be super memorable tracks on their own, I think they're definitely a lot of fun. Overall though, I think WarioWare Get It Together is definitely a fun party game and can be a really good game to whip out for a bit during get-togethers. But is it really worth the $50 price tag? I'm not so sure. I don't hate it at that price, but I do think it's a bit pricey for a collection of minigames, and in my opinion, the single player doesn't really feel that great. A $40 base price might have been a lot easier to digest, but I think how much you'd be willing to shell out might be more based on how often you might find yourself in co-op or party game situations. I think $25 would be my personal ideal price, but of course it's Nintendo, so I wouldn't really hold out for that. If I had to give the game a score, I'd probably give it a light 3 out of 4, and in my opinion, while it's still wacky fun, I personally think it's one of the weaker entries in the WarioWare franchise. But hey, that's just me. Feel free to let me know down below what you think. Have you tried Get It Together, and what did you think? If you made it this far, I just want to say I appreciate you checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that like or subscribe button as it really helps my channel grow and motivates me to make more and better videos. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.